Okay, so in a previous chapter, we had created an AWS account by this particular name. Now, also we'd learned that there is also an ID that is associated with this particular account. Now, again, to go back and check your particular ID, you can go back to your console and you can just click on this drop down and you can get the account ID for your particular account. So now that you know what an account is, let's talk about the concept of regions and availability zones. So these are two very important concepts to understand. So a region is basically a physical location where there is a cluster of data centers. So here, for example, is a region called US East 1. And this particular US East 1 has basically a cluster of data centers that is associated with it. Now, an availability zone is one or more discrete data centers which has its own redundant power, networking, and connectivity within an AWS region. So each particular data center here would be known as an availability zone. Now, if you're looking at an example of US East 1, which is basically one of the regions, you can see that this particular US East 1 has got 6 availability zones. And these availability zones are associated with these particular names. So for example, the first availability zone would have a name of US East 1, basically that's the name of the region and suffixed with the alphabet A. Similarly, there would be another 5, and so in total there are 6 availability zones for this particular region. Now likewise, there is also another region called US East 2, and this US East 2 has got 3 availability zones within it. So if you go back to your console, and if you open this particular drop down, you can see all the regions that are available. So currently I'm in US East 2, that's why it's coming as highlighted. So if you want to go to your US East 1 region, you can just click on this particular US East 1. And currently your account is taken to your US East 1 region. So likewise, there are around 21 regions currently. So these numbers keep changing as time goes by, these regions keep increasing. So that is the concept of regions and availability zones. Now, one more thing to note is that your regions are basically spread across the globe. So you can see that it's not only present in the US. For example, again, US East 1 is basically North Virginia. US East 2 is in Ohio. The US West is in North California. So it's not just in the US, it's also available in Asia, Canada, Europe, as well as in the Middle East and in Africa. So if you want to create your resource close to an end user, you need to know where the particular end user is located, and you can create your resource in the nearest region based on the application that you're creating. So that's one important thing to know. Now, apart from that, before we finally conclude this chapter, let me talk about a very important concept called high availability. So if you go back to this particular architecture, the reason why we have an architecture that looks something like this is because of a very important concept called high availability. So let's say that you've created an application in US East 2 in one of the particular availability zones. Now, the concept of having multiple availability zone is to make sure that you can actually create these applications redundantly in multiple availability zones. So in doing so, what is going to happen is, even if one of these availability zones goes down, you still have your application running in the other availability zone, thereby making your application highly available. So this is a very important concept for you to understand. So having your applications created in multiple availability zones makes your application even more highly available. So please do keep that in mind. So once again, before we conclude this chapter, what we've learned today is that we've created an account, and this particular account can access multiple regions in AWS. And a region is basically a geographical area which has a cluster of data centers associated with it. And an availability zone is one or more of those data centers. And the beauty about an availability zone is that it has a redundant power, networking, and connectivity. So even if one of the availability zone goes down because of any of the power failures or networking failures, it would not affect the other availability zones within that same region. And finally, we concluded by talking about high availability, where you can create applications within multiple availability zones of your particular region, and even if one of those availability zones goes down, you still can access the application via the other availability zone. So that's it for this one. I hope this was useful. I will see you in the next.